This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for May 14th, 2019, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Pat is going to talk to us about what's a social insurance number. And then I'm going to look at global population growth. And finally, Adam is going to address the age-old question, was Sonic the Hedgehog character doll made out of a human skeleton?
Yeah, that's right.
But first, we would like to say a wonderful happy birthday to our good friend of the show, Stuart Robbins.
Happy birthday, Stuart.
Hey, happy birthday, Stuart.
Happy birthday, Stuart.
We're happy you're in our orbit.
Aww.
And now, on to reality checking. Pat, what is a social insurance number?
Right. So I got the idea to talk about the Canadian social insurance number, or as Darren mentioned, several people refer to it as a SIN number, which is kind of like saying ATM machine. But anyhow, I got the idea after listening to a recent Stuff You Should Know podcast titled, What Happens When the Government Thinks You're Dead? In the episode, they talk quite a bit about U.S. Social Security numbers, and I thought it might be fun to talk about the Canadian SIN. This will obviously be Canada-focused, but hopefully still interesting to listeners elsewhere. To the person who left us a 2-star review on iTunes because he finds it grating that we mention that we're Canadian too often, you might want to skip this segment. So like the Social Security number, the SIN is a 9-digit number. It's issued by the Canadian government to administer government programs. It was created in 1964. Now, several sources suggest it was created for the administration of the Canada Pension Plan, or CPP, which is definitely one of its primary uses now, but I find this a little strange since the CPP legislation received royal assent in April 65 and came into effect in January 66. I think it more likely that it was created for employment insurance, but it's possible the government was anticipating the CPP when it started issuing SINs. In 1967, Revenue Canada, now the Canada Revenue Agency, began using it for tax purposes. So the SIN is formatted differently than the Social Security number. While both are 9 digits, the format of the SIN is 3 groups of 3 numbers, whereas the Social Security number is 3 digits, 2 digits, 4 digits. Okay, I'm going to try and do a magic trick that might not work. Christina?
Yes.
Your social insurance number starts with the digit 4.
It does.
Darren, your social insurance number starts with the digit 4 as well.
No.
I need the magic. Just a sec. 5.
Yes.
Adam,
Wow.
your social insurance number starts with the digit 5 as well.
It does. Don't steal my identity, please, listeners. You only have 8 more to go before you steal my identity.
Better go clear those cookies out.
This is a dangerous game of Name That. I'd like to register my victim.
Just don't ask what my mother's maiden name is.
Okay, so not really a magic trick. The general rule of thumb is that the first digit of a SIN indicates the province it was issued in. And I was guessing that all ours were issued for addresses in Eastern or Central Canada. Christina's would have been maybe 10 years before your guys, and they were using 4 at the time and then switched to 5. So 1 is Eastern provinces, 2 and 3 are Quebec, 4 and 5 are Ontario, 7 is British Columbia.
Is this the province of birth?
Issuance.
No, because I was born in BC, but obviously didn't get my SIN until later.
Yeah, so my children are born in Ontario, but they live in Quebec, so they will probably have a Quebec SIN number. I can check. Oh, SIN number. I did it. I did the thing.
Quebec SIN.
All right. SINs starting with the digit 9 are issued to temporary residents of Canada, and employers are required to guarantee that anyone with a SIN starting with the number 9 also has valid documentation granting the right to work in Canada.
But does an employer need a SIN to hire someone?
Well, so we'll get to that.
Okay.
Perhaps interestingly as well, work distribution for, say, government employees is often broken up by blocks or ranges of social insurance numbers, and work items related to SINs are usually sorted and stored by the last 3 digits, then the first 3 digits, then the middle 3 digits. So when I wrote clerical entrance exams to work for the Canadian government a very long time ago, this was a big part of the test. Could you quickly put things in numerical order according to the last 3, first 3, and middle 3?
So I guess the reason for that is so that you're not accidentally also sorting people by province or date of birth or something like that. And the last three are sort of a more random sampling. Is that the idea?
Well, if you think about an office that's somewhere in Ontario, say Scarborough, all of them will start with 4.
Oh, sure.
Or 5, right.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so how can we verify if a SIN is valid? Christina, do you want to say anything about this?
So today, curiously, I got an email from a producer at CBC. And when artists perform at CBC, they require their SIN or their, what are they, Social Security numbers in the States? In order to ensure that they get payment for their performance. And out of the blue today, the producer wrote me and said, hey, this band member's SIN is wrong. Can you please just double check and get back to me? And I said to Pat, oh, isn't that funny? And then Pat sat with me and showed me the math on a piece of paper of how to figure out it was wrong. So it was actually pretty cool.
Right, using the LUN algorithm or LUN formula. But those people who work with SINs, they refer to this as a mod 10 check. So here is a fictitious but valid SIN, 046 454 286. We know it's fictitious because it starts with the digit 0 and they don't issue SINs which start with 0. So with Christina, we wrote that out. And below that, we wrote 121 212 121. We always use this number to verify a SIN. And then we multiply each top digit by the bottom digit. So 0 times 1 is 0, 4 times 2 is 8, 6 times 1 is 6, 4 times 2 is 8, 5 times 1 is 5, 4 times 2 is 8, 1 times 2 is 2, 8 times 2 is 16, 6 times 1 is 6. Then we add those resulting digits across. If we have a 2-digit answer, as in our example where we had 16, we add each individual number, so 1 plus 6. So in our example, 0 plus 8 is 8, plus 6 is 14, plus 8 is 22, plus 5 is 27, plus 8 is 35, plus 2 is 37, plus 1 is 38, plus 6 is 44, plus 6 is 50. All valid SINs will result in a number evenly divisible by 10. Thus the name mod 10. All right, so what are the risks related to your SIN? No big surprise, but the number is often used for identity theft. According to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, someone could use it to apply for a credit card or open a bank account or rent vehicles or equipment. Someone could also receive your government benefits, tax refunds, or bank credits.
Ooh, that's more dangerous.
If someone uses your SIN to work illegally or obtain credit, you could be requested to pay taxes for your income you didn't receive.
Oh, burn.
Yeah.
So, how do you protect your SIN? Don't carry your SIN card in your wallet and shred documents that you don't need that have a SIN on them. Store anything with your SIN in a safe place. And only provide your SIN when it's legally required. That begs the question, who can ask for your SIN? The answer is anyone. There is no law preventing private sector organizations from asking for your SIN for other purposes such as identification. But that doesn't mean you should provide it. The most common uses of your SIN are interacting with federal government departments and programs who are specifically authorized to collect the number, such as Service Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency. Your employer needs your SIN for income reporting. Some private sector organizations, such as banks, also need it for income reporting. Hydro-Quebec is required by provincial law to collect your SIN when opening an account. Now, here are some examples when you don't need to give your SIN, which may surprise you. Proving your identity to anyone except specific government programs. Completing a job application. Completing an application to rent a property. Negotiating a lease with a landlord. I've personally gotten into arguments about this when renting homes because boilerplate lease agreements almost always ask for the SIN.
Yeah.
You don't need to give your SIN when completing a credit card application or cashing a check or completing bank transactions like mortgages or a line of credit or a loan.
Really?
You don't need to give it when completing a medical questionnaire or renting a car or subscribing to long distance or cellular telephone services. Those last two are really common.
Really? I would never give my SIN to a cell company.
So the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada suggests that you should always check if there's a legal requirement when asked for your SIN.
Well, is the flip side of that, is a company allowed to say that they won't do business with you if you don't give them their SIN?
Well, here we go.
Yeah.
If there's not a legal requirement, don't give it to them. You cannot be denied a product or service for refusing to provide your social insurance number when it's not legally required. If someone does deny you, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner wants to hear about it.
Which is really good to know.
Yes.
But in certain situations, you will probably balance the risk of not getting the thing immediately or the hassle of trying to report it to the privacy commissioner versus the loss of freedom or security, you think, by providing it to someone who doesn't need it.
Well, depending how much you care about it, the threat might be enough to make the person back down.
Yeah, exactly.
But the person, the person asking you for the sin's not the one that made the decision to put it on that form in the first place. So they may just be like, I don't really know what to say if you're saying you're not giving me your sin, right?
But also, what a way to kick off the relationship with your new landlord. Boss.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, wait till you see my dog.
But it could be that you're informing them of something that that they're not aware of, right?
sure.
You do not have
Right.
the legal right to collect this information. So that's the social insurance number. As an aside, I got my SIN just before I got my first job at age 13 or 14. It was kind of a big deal, actually. I got this plastic card in the mail, and it felt very grown up.
Yeah.
I know they stopped issuing plastic cards in 2014, but I was interested. Adam, do your youngest kids have SINs? Because they seem to be pretty much issuing them at birth nowadays.
So the reason we attempted to get our sins as fast as possible for our children was so they could get RESPs, registered
Education settings.
RSP type of things. Whether, you can tell me if they don't really need it, but I think
They do.
with the bank.
For
that's-
RESPs.
Yeah, they do for RESPs.
Yeah. Besides that, I personally got mine, like you said, when I was, 15, 16 or something like that, because it was something you kind of needed to have a job, or it was good to have as I was getting a little older. But as a child, my family didn't have RESPs, so that wasn't something we could benefit from.
You do typically need one for RESP ECTs. Well, at least just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
I think it's interesting to think about how many humans there are, how many there were, and how many there will be.
Yeah.
As for how many there were, Adam covered this way back in episode 50, where he looked at the myth that there are more people alive now than ever before.
Yeah.
And that is indeed a myth.
Yes, very.
Regarding the future, the common stance seems to be that population growth is unsustainable and will destroy the planet. But is this true? I guess we'll find out in my segment on world population growth. Where might one find a good source for such a segment? Well, the wonderful website Our World in Data recently published an update to their analysis on world population growth. It is by Max Roser, Hannah Ritchie, and Esteban Ortiz Ospina, with a lot of their sources being the history database of the global environment and the United Nations Population Division. I am mainly summarizing what I consider the most interesting tidbits from that excellent article. And it's quite a long one. It's more of a chapter for a theoretical book. Yes, they do present some nice figures and charts, perfect for audio listeners, but I'll do my best to communicate them, or at least the main ideas they represent. Let's get to the meat of it, or the tofu. What is the current global population? About 7.7 billion people.
Okay. Oh, wow. It's really getting close to 8, eh? I remember when it crossed 7. Wow.
And then, so that's the middle part of the segment done. What was it? Well, at one point, there were 0 people. And you can't get a human from a non-human, so it must have been magic.
It was like a human egg.
I kid, of course. Evolutionary changes happen gradually, blah, blah, blah. Let's just start around 12,000 years ago in 10,000 BC.
Sure.
There's this nice chart, which you can find linked in our show notes at trcpodcast.com.
Decent website.
That's okay. And then in 10,000 BC, there's about 4 million people. And then we have a very slow population growth. So in the year 0, there's about 190 million. Then in 1700, there's about 600 million. In 1800, it's about 990 million, almost a billion. In 1900, there are 1.65 billion. In 1928, 2 billion. 1960 is 3 billion. 1975 is 4 billion. 1987 is 5 billion. 1999, 6 billion. 2011, 7 billion. 2019, 7.7 billion.
Wow.
So the chart really is one of those so-called hockey stick graphs, but with an even greater angle. It's almost a right angle.
1 billion between 6 billion to 7 billion from 99 to 2011.
Yeah, like 12 years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Even though it took quite a long time to get to that first billion.
Yeah.
Well, what about the growth rate? Given that the Earth didn't have many humans in 10,000 BC, and around 600 million in 1700, that means for that time, on average, the population grew at only 0.04%. Alternatively, the global population growth rate peaked long ago and has been declining for 50 years, with the future following that trend line.
Really?
Yes. It actually peaked in 1962-63. Now, a common question they said they're asked is the global population growing exponentially?
Yeah.
And the answer is no.
Okay.
For global population growth to be exponential, the growth rate would have to be the same over time.
Right.
For example, 2% growth every year. In absolute terms, this would result in an exponential increase in the number of people. That's because we'd be multiplying an ever larger number of people by the same 2%. 2% of the population this year would be larger than 2% last year, and so on. That means the population would grow exponentially.
So
and all of that is a quote, by the way.
So birth rates must be declining.
There you go.
Not in Adam's house, apparently.
No, he's making up for other podcast hosts.
Yes.
Yes, I'll need 6 more sins. Thank you. Okay, have a nice day.
But as we saw in the chart above, or as you heard in the described chart, since the 1960s, the growth rate has been falling, and this means world population is not growing exponentially, and for decades, it has been similar to a linear trend. In case you're wondering how our population is distributed, most people live in Asia. And I thought this was an interesting phrase. Most people always lived in Asia. Today, it is 60%. 200 years ago, it was 68%.
Oh, interesting.
And if you want to see relative distribution across the world, regions in more detail, you can switch to a relative view. Again, I recommend going check out this article because there's a lot of interesting charts and graphs. The world region that saw the fastest population growth over the last 200 years was North America at 31-fold. Latin America saw the second largest, 28-fold, over the same period of time. Europe had an increase of 3-fold, in Africa 14-fold, and in Asia 6-fold. And that's, of course, because there were smaller numbers to start with to a certain extent, as well as, of course, people having more children.
Yeah, and that has repercussions on economic development, wealth distribution, all sorts of interesting things.
Well, what about the future? Population growth is still very fast. Every year, 141 million people are born and 57 million people die. The difference is the number of people that we add to the world population in a year, which is about 84 million. In terms of overall total population that we might eventually hit, the projections are in 2100 around 11.2 billion people. And this would be peak population and not much more than that.
Meaning it won't go above that?
Correct.
It balances itself out somehow?
It will. And so depending on who you listen to, once it hits that, it will never go above that.
Sure. So it'll probably waver a bit, but like it's pretty steady.
Well, so you say it's steady in a way, but the growth rate is in rapid decline.
Yes.
It's about 1% now, and by that time it's projected to go to 0.1%. And so it's just going to go down.
There are obviously things that can change. If we achieve immortality, that'll really skew.
Yes, if we end up going to the stars, if we do other things, certainly.
Yes.
I think future projections of population are very interesting to talk about. Most people think it is too much, and I'm going to now offer a counter view from Kevin Kelly, who published this little short essay called The Underpopulation Bomb in 2013 when he was responding to the Edge's website, edge.org, which I highly recommend, their question of what should we be worried about.
Sure.
He said, and this is an excerpt of the end, "Here is the challenge. This is a world where every year there's a smaller audience than the year before, a smaller market for your goods or services, fewer workers to choose from, and a ballooning elder population that must be cared for. We've never seen this in modern times. Our progress has always paralleled rising populations, bigger audiences, larger markets, and bigger pools of workers. It is hard to see how a declining yet aging population functions as an engine for increasing our standard of living every year." So, whenever I hear people talk about like, oh, there's too many people, you're like, or is there going to be too few people? And I think it's really interesting to talk about. So I do think, yes, there is a so-called carrying capacity to the Earth, and depending on what you value regarding what the Earth has, we are already having too many people on the Earth, or we have tons more room. And it really is like, well, how much damage do you want to do? What's going to, like, the Earth will be fine. It's just how many people you think can survive for how long. So I think it's very interesting to think that population could peak and then go down, because in our lifespans, they've always been going up very high. Some people think that these estimates are actually looking at it incorrect, that there's actually going to be fewer people, so it would peak at a lower number earlier. But it is interesting to think, like, once it goes, it hits a certain point, it'll just go down possibly forever.
So we can debate that point, but the bottom line is it's going to peak at some point somewhat soon, and it's going to kind of, it's not going to keep going higher.
Unless there's some sort of expansion, colonization. If we become somewhat like sophisticated AI or robots, it becomes a very different thing.
But Darren, that's all fun to think about, but is there something that's more sort of down to earth that you can take into consideration, like the fact that in China the one-child rule is gone, and the fact that as technology gets better and healthcare, that we live longer and that sort of thing? Like, is that taken into consideration at all?
Oh, certainly, because yes, the people are living longer, which then affects these larger demographics. And so the article goes into much more detail about various things.
So they just kind of make trend lines about everything. And
well, you can imagine it's sort of what's the right visual to give here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there used to be a lot of problems with children dying when they're young,
Yep.
and there's less of a problem. So when population growth rate occurs at a certain time, you can picture like a really big pyramid with a really wide base. But then over time, that wide base then sort of shifts up vertically over time.
So that wide base is the surviving children.
Correct.
The young yes.
Correct.
Okay.
And then there's a little a chart you can interact with. You're like, you can just move it along. You're like 670 children, 680 children. And then it goes to a certain point where, okay, now there's fewer. And there's all of a sudden there's just fewer children being born, which tips at a certain point, which then years later then affects our overall population growth. So then you can imagine this cohort of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, this massive number of people that then won't have as many people before them, and then definitely don't have as many like ahead of them, so to speak. And then once they move through, it'll just be a lesser number.
And then that affects school numbers, but I think also like inflation and stuff like that really depend on population growth. Some people compare the economy to a giant Ponzi scheme and things like that. But that's certainly potentially an issue. You look at things like retirement plans and things like that, go off of the assumption that you always have, new fresh blood coming in at a higher rate. And then you kind of have to rebalance all of that math, which I think some governments are starting to do. But it gets a little complicated.
In a way, it's not a problem for us, unless we do have some good extended healthcare when we're older. Although, based on my understanding of the world, by 2100, there could be a really sophisticated AI which would upturn everything.
Yeah.
And now we turn to Adam to explore the population of hedgehogs, or at least one hedgehog.
It's not actually a hedgehog, it's a chipmunk, but we'll get to that.
Oh no! 2 myths in one segment.
Sonic is a hedgehog, though. Now, a couple of weeks ago, a trailer for the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog film was released. Sonic fans are generally unimpressed with the trailer, which I find humorous as I have no attachment to the franchise. It's not like it's a Star Wars movie or something. In the wake of the trailer, a viral tweet mentioned something I'd forgotten years ago, and that was that someone once made a life-sized, sexy doll of a Sonic the Hedgehog character, Sally Acorn, to be specific, built around a human skeleton. While I recalled this story from when it first came out, I started to ask myself whether it was really true. Was that really a human skeleton? This might need a bit of backstory here. Now, there's this thing called furries. Bear with me a moment. Basically, a furry is described as a person who has an interest in anthropomorphic animals. This means animals with human-like traits. So usually, they walk on 2 feet and they generally resemble us humanoids, but also have fur and ears and a tail.
That's not it, though, because a lot of people like Disney movies.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Not everyone who watches a show that has anthropomorphic animals is necessarily a furry. Certainly, like Darkwing Duck and Tailspin and Shoals' DuckTales. These are all cool. Although not all of those have fur, some have feathers, they're still considered furries. Now, there's often a somewhat sexual or erotic bend to furry culture. So it's not just people who like to watch Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers and play Sonic the Hedgehog, but more like people who draw sexy fan art of anthropomorphic foxes and anthropomorphic characters like Gadget from Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers or Sally Acorn from Sonic the Hedgehog.
To be fair, they did name them Chip 'n Dale.
Which came first, Chip 'n Dale or Chippendales? Now, many furries also like to dress up as anthropomorphic animals in fursuits. Not all of these people do so for sexual reasons, but there are some people who do derive erotic pleasure from doing so, which is why there are terms like fur pile or yiffing. And you can look those up, because I'm not going to get into it. Now, I'm not saying that all Sonic the Hedgehog fans are furries, and I'm not saying that all furries want to have sex with anthropomorphic animals, but there are certainly people who are fans of both Sonic the Hedgehog and fans of drawing erotic art of the series. Now, some of the more hilarious Sonic fan art includes characters being pregnant with other characters, like Sonic being pregnant with Mario and weird stuff like that, but we don't need to get into those specifics. That's out there on the internet if you're morbidly curious. But we're really getting away from the main point here, but hopefully this gives a bit of a backstory as to why someone might want to build a life-size doll of a Sonic the Hedgehog character and dress it up in sexy lingerie. So a tweet that went virally recently by Wendy Snowradish read like this. In honor of the Sonic movie trailer release, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone of the time a person on DeviantArt built a life-size Sally Acorn doll using a human skeleton as the base. It included a photo of a human skeleton with a pink padded torso next to a photo of a humanoid-looking life-sized Sally Acorn, which is presumably built around the skeleton. So Sally Acorn is some sort of chipmunk. Skeleton photo is dated October 11th, 2005 and looks very detailed. It looks real. Close-ups on the hand and feet show individual fingers and toe bones. While the bones aren't white, they are instead an inconsistent shade of a sort of beigeish brown. Does this mean that they aren't real bones, or is this what an actual real skeleton looks like? I haven't actually seen that many human skeletons in my life. Now, I recalled following the story years ago and people debating if the bones were real based on the coloring, but I couldn't really remember where that whole thing ended up. Indeed, the bone color is actually a light brown with coffee milk. Model skeletons are often very white because they're bleached or they're just fake, right? The shade also depends on their age. I don't think this guy looted an Egyptian tomb for his bones, though I'm not sure the color really fits. I've seen animal bones in the woods and certainly in my kitchen, and they aren't as brown as the ones in the picture. And sometimes they may be bleached by the sun or whatever. They may be in water or something like that. So, what does the artist have to say? His DeviantArt page is still up. I had a look through, but I didn't dare click on the mature content thumbnails. If listeners are interested, you can go dig around the show notes if you really want to do that. One of the photos of the doll explains the materials. Body, skeleton, wood, wire, putty. Muscles, spandex stuffed with polyfill. Skin, stretch velvet. Eyes, clear plastic globes painted on the inside. Some of the comments on the photo, Bikini Sally asked about the skeleton, and he described the process. A block of wood with patterns traced onto 2 of 3 sides, top, front, left, and cut on those lines with a bandsaw or zip bit. Then the bone gets rounded out on a belt sander and it's done. Repeat for all bones. Some were sculpted and some were cast in resin. Assemble at the joints, put in the nets, fill with appropriate material, surface, and detail. Done. Sorry to break the urban legend, but it's kind of due for retirement anyway. Now, this may be some elaborate cover-up by someone who had real bones, for some reason posted photos of them on the internet only to deny that he actually had them at all, but the obvious explanation is simply that these so-called bones were carved out of wood. They are realistic for sure. I've never seen a life-sized doll of something, so it's not for me to judge just how realistic the bones have to be in order to make such a thing look and potentially feel real, but it seems like the level of detail is a bit overkill. Not to mention that Sally Acorn and other Sonic the Hedgehog characters don't have actual human proportions. This was obviously meant to be something a little more anthropomorphic than the canon suggests, but, depends what you're going for with your doll. One more point of clarification. The tweet in question refers to it as a sex doll. It was not made to be a functional sex doll. The artist simply dressed it up in sexy clothes. Some users did ask plainly if he engaged in relations with the doll. He did not use that term. And the artist flat out denied that he did. We'll take his word for that.
Well, a gentleman doesn't kiss and tell with his doll that he made to have sex with.
Yeah, also none of anyone's business, any of it.
So no, a guy did not make an anthropomorphic Sally Acorn doll out of a real human skeleton. A guy made an anthropomorphic Sally Acorn doll out of a simulated human skeleton made out of 2x4s he got from Ace Hardware, which is perfectly normal.
Thank you, Adam, for that scintillating segment. And thank you for joining us once again. Pat told us about the social insurance number, and how you really don't have to give it to most of the people that probably ask you for it. Yeah. And you really do want to protect it. I talked to you about global population growth and how it is increasing. What will probably cap out around 11.2 billion in 2100 with our growth rate decreasing. And Adam explored Sonic the Hedgehog, dolls, skeletons, death, and what it means to be human. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy, and go Raps!
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes, or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries, or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.
takes.
Darren's younger than me.
I'm younger than Adam.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I thought it was.
I thought Adam was the youngest.
I'm just immature.
Well, let's just look at the next two segments: global population growth,
Sonic the Hedgehog.
and was Sonic the Hedgehog character
funny.
doll made out of a human
Picturing-
skeleton.
Picturing Christine like in a courtroom, like, let's just turn to the evidence, and like points at a chart. I talked to you about global population growth, which isn't increasing in terms of growth rate. Our population is, but it probably won't for the next. Sorry,
Did you say increasing?
He totally did. Pat just looked. He just looked back at me, and I'm trying not to laugh. You sounded like Mike Tyson.
my plan. My plan is just to knock him out.